Welcome to the Spearo Hangout, where we talk all things spearfishing, freediving and foraging. We're three guys from Devon in the UK who are excited to share some of the learnings from our spearfishing journey with you over the coming episodes. We bring in some special guests along the way to help spread some in-depth Spearo knowledge from some of the most experienced people in the scene. Well, hello everybody. Good to see you all.
Hey.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm good.
Yeah, I've been better.
What happened?
Here we go. Get ready for this, Anthony. So, just to tell everyone, I blanked
Mate,
at
I've
the
really felt
competition on Saturday. And I'm now also behind both of you in the species competition.
Have they uploaded the scores?
No, but I know what you caught, so yeah, it's quite impressive. However, it has given me the kick up the behind that I needed to go out and spearfish. So I'm going to go out tomorrow night and Friday and Saturday and probably Sunday.
Every day until you get ahead of us, eh?
Well,
I think we now need to refer to Ben as Lord Ben Lucky, considering he's the only fucker that caught anything on both dives.
Yeah, there's no skill involved. It's all luck, guys. Five fish, though. Five fish. That's literally my best haul ever on a day's spearfishing. And to do it in a competition,
You did bloody well.
Pretty pleased with it. Plus, I've said it already on Instagram, but big thanks to Sam Seeley, who helped me crack the cuttlefish code. I managed to bag two of them, nearly a third, although the third one got away, unfortunately. But yeah, really, really pleased with that one. They were banging. Absolutely love a cuttlefish.
Well, there you go. See, the podcast is already helping us in loads of different aspects.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. So,
well,
yeah.
my honest opinion is that spearfishing is pretty shit, and I think anybody who does it is
I thought that
shit.
Picture that Rich took of you, sat down with your legs crossed, hands between you.
I'm going to go into professional sandcastle building.
You look pretty rubbish at that as well, to be honest.
Well, that's because I didn't have any water. So, but anyway, I didn't catch anything at the competition. Well, I did. I caught two bloody goat wrasse, of which were not included in the points this competition.
Yeah, Ben,
so, yeah.
You did well, mate. Yeah, you did well. And we've been planning our Sky trip as well, haven't we?
Yeah, proper excited about that one. How long left to go? Was it just over a month?
Something like that. I think it's a month, isn't it?
Yeah.
We went to the pub the other day, didn't we? And we were organising our trips, so we're all good to go. We know what gear we need, and we know what we're expecting, and hopefully the weather plays ball. That's going to be the.
I just can't believe on that list how much lube you guys have added. I mean, I don't know what you two are going to be getting up to in that room.
You're sharing the van with him.
Who said I was sleeping with Ben?
I thought it was just a given.
Well, let's not go down this path of bad sense of humour.
So anyway, lads, we have a guest coming in today as usual. His name is Dr. Pete Davies. We have a doctor on the podcast. That's cool.
Hey.
He's a postdoctoral.
I've got a few things he can look at.
I can believe that. He's a postdoctoral researcher, and he's interested in watching the way that fish migrate. He's doing a lot of projects around fish migrations, which is going to be really exciting. And hopefully can answer us a few questions. I think we had some ones about ears and eyes over the last few weeks, so we're going to put a few of our questions to him. So, yeah, really looking forward to this one. All right, then. Welcome, Pete.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. Pete, I wonder if you could do a little bit of an intro into who you are, what you do, etc., etc.
Absolutely. Pete Davies. My official title is a postdoctoral researcher, and I'm based at the University of Plymouth. It's in the show notes, it says Dr. Pete Davies, and it's still really, really weird to hear myself referred to as doctor. It's like letters from the council and this. I think that's it so far, because I very recently got my PhD.
Oh, congratulations, mate. It's really cool.
Thank you. I'm a kind of marine ecologist. I'm working at the University of Plymouth. My background, my PhD was in freshwater fish. I did research on the movements and migration of a fish called a shad, Thwaite shad, which spawn in quite a few rivers. Well, I should say a few rivers now in the UK. And so I was using telemetry, i.e. tagging and tracking, to work out how their migration patterns are affected by artificial barriers in rivers. And we also looked a little bit at their marine migration. And then since doing my PhD, I've started this job down in Plymouth, and I'm now applying those same techniques, tagging and tracking, to a range of marine species. Started about a year and a half ago, and yeah, loving it. It's been great fun so far.
That's awesome. How do you tag a fish as small as a shad?
There are many ways to tag a fish, but in my case, I primarily use a technique called acoustic telemetry, and there are two kind of main bits of technology. There's the tag and there's the receiver. So it's not like a GPS tag where you have an idea of the whereabouts of an animal all the time. It's only when your tag comes into range of your receiver. Basically, the tag is emitting a signal every 2 minutes or so, and once it comes into the range of a receiver, the receiver picks it up, and by having a network of those receivers dotted around, you can build up then a picture of how that individual is moving. But your original question was, how do you tag a fish? It's quite an involved process in our case, because the tag goes inside the fish.
Wow.
Overall, for the long-term sort of health of the animal, it's much better if the tag is internal rather than external, because if you have an external tag, you've seen things that you leave something in the sea for more than a week and it comes back like covered in algae, covered in seaweed, covered in limpets. You basically, if that was on the outside of a fish, it would be horrible for the animal. It'd create a drag and might get eaten more easily, etc. So yeah, our tags, we'd make a little surgical incision in the fish, in the sort of the belly cavity. Tag goes inside. We suture them back up, recover them. I should say that they're kind of anaesthetized before that process, general anaesthetic, monitored for a bit afterwards, and then back in the sea.
That's amazing. And
they generally incredibly resilient to that process. We've got survival rates over sort of 95-98% of the fish that go through that. So yeah, it is really pretty. Like when people first see that process, and we had some guys on the boat today that they saw we were setting up, and there's big holding tanks and anaesthetic bath and iodine and surgical instruments. They were like, "Whoa, sure, no, this is a bit much." But when they see the kind of process happening and how happily the fish swim off afterwards, people are like, "Wow, that's amazing."
That's incredible.
With the tags, when the fish, if the fish were to be eaten by something bigger, are they biodegradable or?
They're inert, so they're not dissolved by stomach acid. So usually, if they were eaten by something, and it does happen, they would pass through whatever it was. And it's one of the things we have to be really mindful of is when we release a fish, that's our last contact with it, and we have all this data that comes back, and we have to interpret it. And sometimes, it's quite likely that some of those individuals will be eaten. So we'll be interpreting the movement of a bream, and it might actually be the movement of a smoothhound or a dolphin or something. But generally, that's generally quite obvious, because you'll have quite a fish that's behaving quite in a sedentary manner or moving in quite a small home range, but all of a sudden it'll disappear off around the island or just in some other way change behavior. But there are now very clever tags with various types of sensors. So you can get acoustic tags, the same ones I use, but they've got a temperature sensor inside. And so, for example, if your fish is eaten by a dolphin or whale predator, then you'll see the temperature go up to a certain level. And if it's eaten by one of the kind of porbeagle family sharks, they have body temperature higher than water temperature. So that's obvious it's been eaten by that thing. So there are ways of telling in some types of tags. And you also have even cleverer tags which have little bit which dissolves in stomach acid, and they start, after that dissolving process happens, they start emitting a different signal. But in my case, it's usually just about interpreting the track of the animal. How's it behaving? That kind of thing.
Wow, how many incredible. Sorry, Richard.
Sorry, man. How many tags have you guys currently put into fish then?
We have put in, off the top of my head, in the current project, I think we're at about 200 or 250 tags.
Right.
And then in the project, we've got partners over in France doing exactly the same thing, and they're about the same number, and a group up in Belgium who put in a few less. But I think in the course of the project, there'll probably be nearly 1,000 tags put in fish, which when you say that number to people who are used to kind of conventional mark recapture tagging studies, where you just put a physical mark on an animal which is visible, and then you rely on that being recaptured and you get the date, time, whatever, it doesn't sound like much. Mm-hmm. But each of those tags, just to put it in perspective, they're about that big, but they individually cost about £250.
Wow.
They have a battery life of about 4 years. So you can get an incredible amount, provided that, that individual survives for long enough, which, there's a certain amount of natural mortality, but you can get an incredible amount of data from those individual tags.
And sorry to geek out on it. It's probably quite a geeky question. In terms of the tags, what kind of frequencies are you guys using to transmit data? Because I know that Bluetooth and some radio frequencies is really difficult to pass through water, and the scuba guys get quite a bit of an issue. I know, because my watch is you can get the I version of my watch, which will link up to a tank pressure sensor. And they've now done some kind of other radio frequency, because it's obviously difficult to pass radio frequencies through water.
This is all based on sound, which famously travels pretty well in water. It's ultrasonic. Ultrasonic telemetry is another name for what I do. So it's the tags we're using at the moment transmit is 69 kilohertz, and they we can't physically. One of the main problems we have is we can't physically sort of download the data off our receivers, which are at the bottom of the sea, without physically retrieving them. As you say, it's like communicating with it through Bluetooth through the water column is not easy, and so we had to kind of physically retrieve them in order to get the data. But the actual tag and receiver communicate via sound.
Very cool. And so what sort of distance does the fish need to be within the receiver?
It varies massively based on water conditions. So in a if you imagine you've got a still, gin clear, deep lake, they can talk to each other. Tag and receiver can sort of hear each other over 800 meters even.
Christ.
But in in a muddy, shallow estuary with lots of boat noise and lots of chains rattling around and wave action, etc., it's can be much less than that, maybe 150, 200 meters. And then where it really doesn't perform well, and I encountered this a lot during my PhD, was when you get lots of bubbles in the water, trained there that act as like an insulator. So I was doing research on fish movement around weirs in the river, but it's basically, the closer it gets to the weir, the more impossible it gets to actually track the fish. And in those scenarios, things like radio tagging, radio telemetry are much more effective.
Very cool.
And is this all part of like the current study that you're doing on your project? On Intel project?
Yeah. So I'm employed on a fixed term 2-year contract on a project called Fish Intel, which is a collaborative project between the University of Plymouth, which is sort of lead partners, and the Isles of Scilly, IFCA, the University of Exeter, is sort of the UK side, and then we've got various partners in France and Belgium, University of Brest, Ifremer, and various others. There's quite a few, can't name them all, but the idea of the project is to use this tagging and tracking technology to effectively come up with better ways of managing our target species. So they're all like effectively, by the more you know about how animals move, the better place you are to design fisheries management measures.
Nice.
Kind of in the spirit of what's sort of known as ecosystem-based sort of fisheries management. So rather than thinking about fish simply as stocks, in the manner of a banker might think of, how much stock of a particular resource do we have. I think by using movement data, you can really come up with much more effective ways of managing fisheries. So yeah, it's a European funded project. Amusingly, it was like it's probably one of the last. We kind of snuck in just as just prior to Brexit. We got funded, and it's funded by a body called Interreg Channel, which is like it's a European funding body which promotes projects which operate in the Channel region of the UK and France. So it's very busy at the moment. Lots of time on boats, tagging fish. Our main target species are all things with kind of commercial and recreational interest. We're looking at bass, pollock, bream, black bream, I should say, crawfish, and bluefin tuna, all through this acoustic telemetry technique. We have this quite extensive now array of acoustic receivers dotted around the coastline, stretching from Sussex, on the UK side, Sussex, all the way down to Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, and then at various locations on the sort of Brittany and Normandy coast, and then stretching up into Belgium. We've got quite a large area of the sort of coastal sea in northwestern Europe now covered with these receivers. So
that's amazing. What are they based on? Are they like in buoys or on rocks? Or
it's various moorings, but the main one we use on this side are they're acoustic release receivers. So we effectively you have a receiver, and then a huge lump of chain, and you send that down to the seabed. The receiver is associated with 3 quite big trawl floats, and then we come along, and when we're ready to download the data off that receiver, we communicate with it, and it's got a little rotating pin inside which unscrews, and it all pops up to the surface, and we can retrieve it at that point, download the data, and then send it back down. And it's much more, basically the reason we do that is because anything you put on surface moorings you'll lose either in a storm or be cut away or be what is that? Because they look quite weird. They're these black cylinders and they flash red every 10 seconds. So anyone that finds it is like, what is this? So best to keep them out of.
It's the Russians.
Exactly.
amazing.
Yeah, and so in terms of getting those, because obviously, I mean, at 250 quid a pop for a fish, that's a very expensive little fish. How do you go about? I mean, is there any way of you going to get them back? Can you track them? Have you guys thought about that? Is there a recovery process? As in
do we want to get the tag back?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think the tag runs. Ideally, the tag stays in the animal, for 4 years and then runs out, and eventually that's the last pursuit of the animal. And if that happens, that's amazing. We do sometimes get tags returned to us. They're caught.
Wow, that's cool.
And there are ways of actively tracking the fish. So rather than having these static receivers, you have a mobile receiver which you stick over the side of the boat or kayak or on foot, and you can kind of hear if fish are in the vicinity. Because the sort of technology isn't that suited or very well suited to actually locating the exact position of that fish, simply because of the range over which you're listening. So I was saying earlier how the fish might be 500 meters away. So your ability to actually get that tag back, if you have a fish that's died on seabed or been eaten, it's usually pretty low. So
you can't sort of hone in on where it is. I suppose I'm trying to get at when you guys are going to release a subscription for our kayaks and stuff to be able to go and pinpoint specific fish.
Like on the next Navionics update.
Exactly.
Like you get the shaded relief, and then you'll get little icons
saying this is fish number 1, 2, 3, 4. I expect, from probably considering they're 250 quid a pop, it's going to be a very expensive subscription.
Probably, but the rate of change these days, honestly, 5 years time,
there'll be pennies.
And you're saying, Peter, the idea of this is to better preserve fish stocks. Is that through things like marine protected areas?
Yeah, I think we aren't necessarily nailing our colours to the mast and saying that the data that comes out of this will be used for any specific management tool, of which MPAs are one. But I think it's just a recognition of the fact that a lot of these species, there is just so little known about how they move and how different habitats are connected or not, and how different fisheries management zone, because a lot of it's done zonally, whether it's by country or within different districts of the UK, or so I think it's just a recognition of the fact that we get so little known about how they move, and that the more we know, the better place we are to come up with some measures, whether it's MPAs, whether it's temporal, as in like timing, close season based restrictions on fishing, or I guess so it's a very long-winded way of saying not very much, but MPAs are potentially a good tool if we were to stumble across something that made us think, in this instance, we need to protect this fish in this area, kind of thing.
And who makes those calls? Like, who decides this should be an MPA between this point and this point? How does that work?
Absolutely not me. Absolutely not me. The way, I guess it would be more like we're collecting this data, and we hope to get it out there, publish it in various formats, in the form of reports. We're going to make maps of sort of species distribution. We're going to hopefully publish stuff in the scientific literature, and then it's more the kind of the job of regulatory authorities and policymakers and legislators to, if something that we find out is particularly pertinent or useful to one of those species, then that's when they might use it as evidence to support a particular MPA, maybe, or a restriction. But that's a long way down the line, and potentially might it might not ever get there. But it would be. I'm not saying it would be nice if it did, but it'd be great if we collect data that is useful to someone and it can be used as evidence. Like we it's better if things are evidence based, right? So the whether it's in medicine or fisheries management, I think it'd be great to think that some of the stuff we're doing now could be used by someone in the future to come up with a way of ensuring that these species stick around.
And you were saying earlier on that did you say you got the funding for 4 years for the scheme?
2 years. So
2 years. Yeah. So with the battery with the battery lasting 4 years, who's doing all the research or carrying on the research when there's still 2 years left of battery?
Question, Anthony. So the challenge at the moment is not just to go out and tag all the fish, it's to start writing funding proposals to keep this going, because it'll be a massive shame if come March next year, which is when the project officially ends, if we have to pull all the gear out. I don't think we're going to get to that stage, because I think people are, and we're in discussions now with people who are interested in keeping this going, because the benefits with all this stuff is that long-term data set. You can make some inferences from 1 year of data, but really the value comes when you're tracking things over multiple years. And then you can look at,
even speaking to spearfishers, sort of in our community, you can, from the people that have been doing it years, specifically one of my sugar daddy, as they call him, David Callahan's been spearfishing for years, and he's sort of obviously been in the water a lot, seen the way the fish move, how some years like there's no bass, there's loads of pollock. The next year there'll be all bass, no pollock. Other species disappear. I would have thought that 2 years that it would give you a snapshot, but it's not going to give you really even a sort of a skim of the surface of reality. So you guys need to be going on for a lot longer, I'd have said.
Completely agree. You want to give us the money to carry on?
I think I've got a tenner somewhere.
That'll buy a tenth of half a tag.
Yeah, it won't even start the boat.
I completely agree. Our kind of dream and vision for this Fish Intel network is that it will become a semi-permanent, if not almost permanent, tracking network that we can manage, and other people who want to do tracking-based research can benefit from, because all this technology talks to each other. So if we pick up fish on our receivers that have been tagged by people we don't know elsewhere in Europe, and they've just turned up. So recently in Lyme Bay and off Plymouth, we've picked up bass that were tagged last year in northern Netherlands and in Belgium.
Wow!
It's that kind of thing that is the additional stuff that you don't expect to find, which is so cool with all this. Those studies, they were looking at very specific things, the movement of fish in and around coastal embayments and estuaries, but just simply by doing that, they were able to find out about this really cool migration and the timing of that, and vice versa. We hope that our fish will be picked up elsewhere on sort of these semi-permanent tracking arrays that we hope to set up here. So yeah, agreed. The long-term view is the important one.
Nice.
And have you been involved in any other research projects with the Sheehan Research Group, or?
Yes. My research group is headed up by a lady called Professor Emma Sheehan, or Dr. Emma Sheehan. I can't remember if she's a doctor or a professor. She's an associate professor. That's what she is. And she primarily started out doing research on the impacts of the Lyme Bay statutory instrument, which is a big area of Lyme Bay you may or may not know about, where they've completely excluded bottom-towed fishing gear. And she started out looking at basically setting up one of these long-term monitoring studies, where, in collaboration with local fishermen, came up with kind of ways of flying a camera across the seabed, and were able to survey vast tracts of the seabed within that area and outside of it, to kind of look at the recovery of Lyme Bay. And in her kind of research has continued in a similar vein. She's done that kind of stuff around, there's a big offshore mussel farm off Sidmouth, and also looking at renewable energy, wind power and wave power, the effects of those kind of artificial structures on the seabed, and on sort of the ecology of the surrounding sea. But more recently, she's kind of got into tagging and tracking. So that's where I came in to join the team as part of the kind of the Fish Intel team. Although I did spend a month up in Orkney last year helping out on one of these other more applied community ecology sort of focused projects. So we're looking at wave energy up there, and its impact of marine renewables on the seabed and on the animals that inhabit it.
And Pete, just digging into one of that specific project where, is it bottom toad trawls?
Yeah,
correct term was banned from the Lyme Bay area.
Yeah.
That's been in place for quite a while now. I don't know how many years. What is the impact of that, just out of interest?
It's been pretty astounding in terms of the recovery.
Yeah.
Of things of sort of soft-bodied or sort of reef-building species. So there are places now where we fly the toad array over certain reefs in Lyme Bay, which 12 years ago resembled fields of rubble, and now they resemble more like something you might see in the Caribbean, like
wow.
sort of stands of pink sea fans, incredible structure, loads of fish inhabiting the surrounding area, and it's so cool. It's really cool.
Yeah.
And similar kind of I don't know the figures off the top of my head, but there's some published data which I'm happy to link in after, done by a colleague of mine, Davies, who's now left the group, but he used this long-term data set to look at the sort of change in abundance of commercially important species and recreationally important species. And I think, again, sort of increases by 400%. I think that number springs to mind.
Wow.
Of some of these commercially valuable species. There are all sorts of caveats with it, because effectively, when the story in Lyme Bay, and as you might expect, if you close a big area to bottom toad gears, that's going to become potentially a bit of a magnet for static gears. So I think there was an increase in intensity of potting and netting within the Lyme Bay area. So all of those, results that I've just described, they have to be taken with the thought that this is still quite an intensively fished area in many ways, just not by toad gears, so not by dredging and trawling. So we've removed those specifically, but everything else, angling, fixed nets, pots, are still permitted.
So Pete, a bit of a controversial question. Is there anything that trawling does that could be classed as sustainable? I don't know if I'm wording the question right. I mean, we've heard obviously that in the MPAs, some of the trawling's been, in Lyme Bay, it's been stopped, and we've had good things. Is all trawling bad, or is there some of it that can be good? Is there specific areas where we wouldn't mind trawling, or is trawling just outdated now?
I guess it depends what you mean by sustainable, because what trawling does is it can take quite complex habitats and homogenize them a bit, make them simpler, through the simple action of repeatedly raking over an area. And there are some species that do better in that newly homogenized area, if you like.
Right.
I suppose the vast majority of whatever was there before didn't benefit, but there are some things that do. So if your idea of sustainability is, can we do this thing in perpetuity and expect to keep getting the same result? Well, I'd say yes, that probably is the case with some trawling. And also, I guess, in places which are really high energy places, with loads and loads of wave and swell action, which are quite sort of sandy, sedimenty habitats anyway, then again, trawling a net over that area isn't necessarily going to do as much damage as it would trawling it over a pristine reef.
Yeah,
but awesome. The heavy caveat with that again is that a lot of places we assume are homogeneous, silty, sandy habitats are just like that because they are regularly trawled. So it's really that kind of that baseline thing is hard, and it started so long ago as well.
Marine protected areas, then, what is good and what needs to be improved? Because there's quite a lot of differentiation between different MPAs, right?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think when people imagine, when you say marine protected area, they imagine somewhere that's protected from most things.
Yeah.
But in the UK, most of the things that we call MPAs or sound like MPAs because of what they're called aren't protected from most things. And in fact, in a lot of them, everything is allowed.
Really? So, what is a voluntary thing, or?
Well, they're kind of no, no. There's not any voluntary. Like a lot of the MCZs, marine conservation zones that we have in the UK, everything is allowed, and that is. And I've spoken to people. I've got a friend who dives down in Cornwall, and he was talking about going out to the manacles, and he said, "Oh, but we can't take fish there because it's MCZ." And I was like, "No, MCZ doesn't actually mean anything in terms of taking fish in that context. It's a kind of very limited thing. A lot of MCZs don't allow trawling, but in the main, they allow everything else. And so I think when people imagine MPA, they imagine somewhere that's fully protected. But actually, in the UK, there are, I think, 2 or 3 areas of the sea which actually have full protection from all kinds of fishing and extraction of any kind.
Yeah.
You've got Lundy, around the area around Lundy Island, North Devon, that's North Cornwall. You've got an area around the island of Arran, in the Western Isles of Scotland, and somewhere else. It escapes me, but basically, that to me is like just incredible because
it's like let's put an MPA, a marine protected area, on this area, and not actually stop anybody from doing anything at all. Like, what's the point in an MPA?
It's kind of like they're in some ways they were kind of designating the area, and I'm not to be honest, I'm not too familiar with the process of the marine conservation zone designation, and but I do know that initially, as part of that process, they included areas called reference areas, and these were supposed to be areas which had no that were effectively protected. They had nothing going on. They were called reference areas because they would be areas where we could refer to look at what was happening in those areas, to effectively look at what the sea can look like. What can an abundant area in the sea in the UK look like? But I believe in one of the sort of the last round of the designation, those just canned, and we ended up with this series of areas which, in many cases, don't mean much. I guess the reason I'm waffling on about this is because obviously the point of an MPA is like it's a fisheries management tool in the sense that you protect the breeding stock of fish, say, as we know, like the bigger fish gets, the number of eggs it can produce increases sort of non-linearly. It goes like exponentially, an exponential increase in the number of eggs. So again, this is just an example. These figures don't actually necessarily mean anything, but imagine a 40 centimeter bass produces 100,000 eggs, then 50 centimeter bass would produce 1 million eggs, 60 million, etc., etc. So by protecting those there's an acronym which I love called BOFS, BO, big old fat fecund female fish. That's what the MPAs provide you. So they allow fish to grow to a size where they can become the real engine rooms of that production of juveniles for the future. So that's what obviously one benefit of MPAs in protecting vulnerable species, etc. But I think on the other, if as important, if not more important, side of MPAs is that if you have an area which is completely protected from all forms of extraction, you enable people to imagine what the sea could look like in terms of its abundance, which is for most people, me included, impossible, because we don't have no real idea what an unimpacted marine environment looks like really in the UK, because fishing has been going on for so long, and quite industrial fishing has been going on for so long. There's evidence, that we're already seeing overfishing in some areas, that in the Middle Ages, for example.
Wow.
That I think if we can have a genuine idea of what it could look like, even if it's just in a small area, and that's then that's so important, I think, for people, not just because it gives us something to aim for, but also just it gets people excited and into the sea as a place that's exciting and not this scary, muddy place.
Yeah, and so a two-part question just for you, Pete. Sorry, Ben. Is the first one: are you a fisherman? Do you spearfish? Do you rod and line fish? Do you trawl? do you do any fishing of any sort, or are you purely science on it?
All of the above, except trawling. Although my dad used to be a sort of part-time crab and lobster fisherman down in Devon, and he's got lots of friends. We've got good friends that do operate trawlers. So I've kind of, and I dabble in spearfishing. I catch probably about 2 bass a year.
And so the reason for the question is sort of just to tie back into what you're saying about the fish sizes and how they obviously breed what I would class as considerably better the bigger they get.
Yeah.
How do you find the current fish sizes sort of imposed on us by the EU legislations? What do you think of the fish sizes? Say, for example, with bass being, 42, 45 centimeters. Do you think that's too small, too big? How do you feel on those?
I don't have any particular view on the minimum landing size for bass, purely because I don't really know enough about the spawning biology of bass to be able to really give you a good answer. I'm glad that there is a minimum landing size than there weren't one. It's a really hard thing to set, I suppose, because you have to decide at what length is a fish likely to have reproduced sort of once in its life. I guess that's kind of the idea with minimum landing size, is to enable fish to reach a breeding age. And that can vary quite a lot between sexes. I think there's some evidence that male bass reach sexual maturity at a smaller size than females. So do you then get into it where you're putting different minimum landing sizes for two sexes, but you can't tell them apart?
Especially after you've shot it.
Exactly. You're like, whoops. Sorry about that. I really don't know enough about spawning ecology of bass to say whether 42 centimeters is good or should be changed.
Well, I suppose the question stands the same then for anything else. I mean, I don't know whether you've got a specific species that you really do like of fish that you sort of have a little bit more of a narrowed view on. But I mean, I suppose if you're saying that all the landing sizes are they're better to be there than not.
They're better to be there than not, but they're also should be, like everything, evidence based. And if evidence comes out that actually they need tweaking, and it would be better if we allow bass to reach 45 centimeters, then fine. And then by the same token, if we have if there's evidence to the contrary, I think that's also fine. Like I'm glad it's there. I think they're a great thing, and that they should be based on the best evidence possible. What the evidence there is, and how evidence based that 42 centimeters is, I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough.
Don't know.
So you say that you spearfish as well. Do you have any like, obviously, I mean, I guess you spearfish because you believe it's also quite sustainable. Is that right? Or
yeah, I mean, I do it because if I don't tend to buy fish in the supermarket, so if I want to eat fish, then I'm gonna go catch it myself. So as a result, don't eat much fish. But when I do, it's very satisfying. I do think, it's selective. I'm not going to sit here and say that in certain cases, spearfishing hasn't been incredibly damaging to certain populations, because any form of fishing can be destructive if intense enough and in the right scenario. And there are plenty of examples. If you look at the Mediterranean, or if you look at in places like the Caribbean, where the spawning aggregations of grouper, for example, that have just been decimated by people with spears, not even spear guns, like Hawaiian slings. Then obviously, yes, we can. It's not. I'm not going to just brand the whole sport with the word sustainable, but I think in most cases it's got a lot going for it in terms of it's very selective. It's actually in the UK not that easy, really, full stop, and not that easy to do most of the year. So in terms of the actual pressure that's imposed on a lot of these things, or a lot of these species, it's quite low, and it's quite spread out, and it is I guess it kind of, when we're online on Facebook or whatever, and this has been a sunny weekend and people are posting photos with bass, and there's always the comments of like, this is unsustainable, etc. But those kind of moments are so few and far between. And if you look at if you were to, I think, sum total potentially all the recreational angling take of the species that are traditional spearfishing targets, I suspect, although I don't know, and I think this would be a really interesting study to do, I suspect angling would still far outweigh spearfishing as a pressure on most sort of species.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I asked is because, much as yourself, I don't buy fish from a shop anymore if I can help it. I mean, I can't remember the last time I bought a fish from a shop. It's very much, if I want something, I'll go out and spear it, really. So, and I think probably it is good and bad. I suppose bad for myself, but it's good for the fish that I haven't eaten as many fish as I normally would as if I'd had gone and bought them. Because, as you say, it's not necessarily the easiest of feats to go and hunt a fish, especially in the UK anyway. But yeah, that's where I was really going with it. I mean, obviously, there's been a couple of debates recently as to the pressures of various spearfishing events throughout the UK. But again, as you say, it's one of those things that's not very well studied, I guess. But
yeah, that's true. I think in many ways, spearfishing it kind of flies a bit under the radar in terms of fisheries management, in my view, certainly in the UK. It's not, and the flip side is the community doesn't necessarily have much of a voice, I would say, in terms of the conversations that the Angling Trust, for example, are involved in, or the Bass Angler Sport Fishing Society, or something, the big kind of organised recreational angling groups that really have a seat at the table in terms of the conversation around fisheries management plans, which are sort of ongoing at the moment. That's my general sense with spearfishing, even though it's probably quite a big and growing community.
Yeah.
There only much representation. But just going back, Richard, to what you were saying about the not buying fish anymore, I think what the cool thing is that it kind of has changed your relationship with eating like animals as a source of protein. It's almost like it's a infrequent treat that you have much more respect for than something that you can just go and buy off a shelf. I think that's really sort of healthy, not just for you, but just for kind of, I think it's something, same with meat, really. I think we should, be fostering a relationship with meat as it once was, where it was a treat to be had once a week, once a month, and enjoyed, rather than something that was like every meal, because the planet, the sea can't sustain either, really.
Absolutely.
Fair enough.
What you were saying earlier on about trawling, and not to go back to the point, but I'd sort of just to put it akin to something else when you were saying about the environments that you may flatten, or I think the word you used was homogenize an area, which is flatten is the word I'd use, but it's sort of akin to, like you see in the Amazon stuff, where they're flattening forests to create land for either grazing of cattle, and you're just getting rid of entire communities of ecosystems and all the tiny little things that live in and amongst all of that. Yeah, it would be fantastic for 100 cows to live on, but there was 100,000 different species of bug and everything else that lived off of that's been destroyed. And I think what you were saying earlier on, I completely agree that there isn't the evidence or the data to really show what the impact of spearfishing has on the sea. However, looking at all of the data that we have got on every type of commercial fishing, I would say that maybe there's a couple of instances where people are spearfishing salmon spawning up a river. Not great. But from nearly every spearo that I've met so far, and even to the extent of some of the competitions, although there's been some disagreement recently, I'd say spearfishing, because it's got to be one of the healthier ways to catch food if you have to. Because in all reality, the best thing for all of us to be is vegan. By the way, don't be vegan, because then you need injections for vitamins because you don't get anything. But no, it's going into the shop and seeing a 2-pack thing of bass that's been farmed in somewhere in Europe, and it's 25 centimeters long. You look at it as a spearfisher now and go, no, that's disgusting.
You become quite
a toff.
Snobbish about supermarket bass, or should I say sea bass? Definitely.
Every time I walk in our local Sainsbury's, and I take the other half in, and we walk past the fish aisle, and I've got a foul face on, and I just look at it and storm past. It's just like, what am I going to do? Nothing. Yeah. But
I hate to work it out though. How much it would definitely be much more economical to buy fish still. Like when I toss up that much, I probably spend year over year. Definitely, someone said it's the most expensive way to get a free dinner or something. I mean, that's true. Angling, spearfishing. I think going back to what you said about the rainforest, I think the different, it's a good comparison, but it's not not the perfect comparison, because whereas if you flatten a rainforest to sow a crop or to grow cattle, you're kind of with that new land, you're sowing and then reaping, sowing then reaping, in a continual cycle. You're promoting the growth of that new thing, and actually, like the land that you create when you flatten a rainforest, often in terms of the actual biomass of stuff that you produce on it, is much greater.
Mhm.
But when you go trawling, you reap, but you never sow. You just reap.
Yeah.
You reap
I
again.
didn't
You're
think
not
about it like that.
you're not seeding in any way the recovery of that area. And I guess it could potentially work like that if you had some kind of agreement where you only trawl an area once every 2 years, and that means that you have turned everything over and allowed the new kind of growth of whatever you're fishing for to happen, and then you come along in the kind of, I think maybe there are scenarios like that, but the vast majority it's just there's no actual reseeding of whatever you're catching.
Yeah. No, good point.
Just moving on, Pete, because I know you probably want to get some tea at some point. Migrations. So in the UK, as you were saying, it's difficult to spear certain times of the year because the fish basically go away. I got obviously with bass as a closed season, but there's not many or as many there anyway during those months. Where do they all go in the winter?
Well, if you speak to a lot of people who know a bit about bass, they'll kind of point vaguely in the direction of the sea, and quite a big area of the sea called the Western Approaches. And they'll say the bass go to the Western Approaches in early spring.
Yeah.
Spawn. But the kind of, I think it's probably way, way, way more complicated than that. But I guess the simple answer is that like in the winter, the water gets colder, and if you're a fish that can't deal with that temperature change, then the best place to move is into deeper water where the water temperature is a lot more stable. So I think there is a lot of that going on. I suppose the other caveat is that like we spend less time in the water in the winter, generally speaking.
We don't.
And it's harder to, it's often harder to see things. But yeah, you're right. There's a general lack of fish when you go diving in the winter, and I think generally, like, whether or not a fish is migrating hundreds and hundreds of miles to a spawning location, or whether it's moving just a mile offshore into deep water and out of the prying eyes of us, I think it varies massively by species, and again is something that very little is known about. I think bass actually is probably the one we know kind of most about, really, because they make this spawning migration offshore, and there's that kind of famous mid-channel trawl fishery which happens in winter and early spring, where they're getting a lot of bass in spawning condition. But we've recently been doing research on this sort of exact topic. So we tagged a load of bass in Salcombe Estuary in January of this year. So they were in the estuary in January, a decent sized bass, like talking like 2 to 5 pounds region of fish. And then mid-February came along, and there was all of a sudden conspicuous absence of a lot of these fish based on our receivers in the estuary, coupled with a whole lot turning up on offshore wrecks and off 7-8 miles off, and in the area around that kind of area. And that was a lot. That was kind of occurring from March to mid-April. So it's almost like not necessarily. I was going to say not necessarily water temperature driven, but then March is sort of the coldest time generally for water. But I guess you've got this closed season for bass, and what we're seeming to find with that is that the timing of that offshore migration doesn't necessarily tally that well with the existing closed season. And if the idea behind a closed season is to protect fish during their spawning migration, then maybe, and this is all super preliminary, we might change our minds, but then it might be that kind of offshore migration timing is not, that doesn't sort of hit the sort of flow season that well.
Yeah, it's not syncing with it.
Exactly, yeah. It's more that it's like new research, which like no one really knows about yet. And I'm kind of, but we know we'll eventually be presenting this stuff to people, and so I can talk in general terms about what we're finding, just with the understanding that it's all super preliminary and
awesome.
It's not to be taken as writ, basically. But
and so moving on from migrations, I mean, probably a similar thing with global warming and the water temperatures that we've been talking about. How have you got any data? I mean, I know it hasn't really been going on long enough for you to have a look, but have you got any data from previous experience as to how it's changing the way the species are moving in our shores?
I'm afraid not. I don't. It's a hard question, and without any, it's the sort of thing that would rely, if we're looking at historical stuff, more on sort of fisheries catches and the distribution of those, rather than any kind of actual movement data, which is what we're kind of trying to collect. And I think what we're doing now and trying to set up this long-term tagging telemetry tracking network is will enable us to make predictions for the future, basically, because we'll be able to look at the exact timing of offshore migration of bass or bream, say, and look at the co-occurring sort of water temperature and environmental conditions when that happened, and then we'll look at the next year, and we'll see how those things might vary with the environment, and then we can then use that info to make predictions for the future based on what we've kind of found. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We can start to build a picture of how those migrations might change, and lots of people are already doing this with things like the actual distribution of species. They're predicting, and they're actually seeing the data. The observed distribution of certain species is moving northwards at a certain number of kilometers a year. I think I can't remember the number off the top of my head. So that kind of research is being done. But in terms of the actual timing of migration, you need quite specific sort of tagging and tracking data to do that, really, and that's what we're after this current project.
Cool. And we're going to go for a break in a minute. But just before we do, the real reason that we actually got you on here, seeing as we're spearfishers, where can we find the fish is the question. So, like, I mean, you've got mullet, pollock, black bream, brill, triggerfish, bass. Maybe you could just say, before we go on a break, one of those, and we'll ask you for one more at the end before we close up. Say, pollock. What from your history, your data, would you say? Where are the pollock?
You're really, really putting me on the spot here.
You've got all your data.
The thing is, I get asked this question a fair amount. Like, can you tell me what marks to go to now, or where we're going to?
Not necessarily marks.
I don't mean that's what you're saying, but I mean it's like. But in general, the fishermen still have a much better idea than me, the scientist, about where to find and how to catch like their particular target species. I'm more saying this is the general region that fish was in September, and this is where it was in November. And look at how cool their back and forth movement is.
Yeah.
And most of that is completely useless to the fishermen. Not quite apart from the fact that we get it all in retrospect, and usually it's like 6 months ago. There's nothing real time about anything I do. But in general, you guys, anglers, commercial fishermen, a lot of what we tell them, kind of commercial fishermen in general, they're like, yeah, I knew that already. Maybe they didn't, but yeah.
Yeah, no, fair enough. So when you go out, sorry, when you go out to then target a species to tag, would you do you ask the commercials or do you ask the fishermen locally to say, look, we're targeting this, we're tagging them, we're not fishing?
Yeah.
Where should we go, or how do you go about, or do you just throw a net out there?
We completely rely on the knowledge of the people who know, the experts. In this case, that not the scientists really. There could come a time in the future where we were able to tell someone this is where the fish are at this particular time, and they might be new to them, but in general, that rarely happens. It's more kind of the kind of general distribution of the fish, the timing that they move, the distances they move, their mortality rate, the kind of interconnectedness between different habitats, which you can only tell by taking like a specific individual, putting a tag in it and following it for the next 5 years. So stuff that you would never otherwise know about kind of the movement of individuals, but generally not that helpful to a fisherman, I'm afraid.
No. No, that's fine. No, I suppose I think actually what you were explaining there was kind of like getting all of the data to then be able to forecast the fish movements, kind of like the weatherman, in that he's only going on data that he's had from previous, what he's seeing at the moment, and then you kind of have to take it with a bit of a pinch of salt, but it's all data that's not there.
Yes, always.
No, amazing. Right, well, we're going to go on a break. So we're back, and my first question ties into something that we got into a couple of podcasts ago, and it's kind of a two-parter. But the first one: do fish have eyelids, and how do they see us as spearos and people in the water? Do we just look like a big fat seal?
Fish don't have eyelids. The reason they don't have eyelids is they don't need eyelids. If you imagine, the purpose of eyelids for us is to kind of keep our eyes moist and to keep dust and debris out of our eyes. Fish don't need to do that. They live in the sea. Everything's washed. The water's washing past. So, as for how they see us, that's a really good question. How do they perceive us? I'm not a fish, so it's hard for me to answer. But based on my own experience, as you know, which is no more valid than anyone else's, they can perceive us as lots of different things. Like sometimes they're threatened by us, and so that kind of speaks to the fact that they see us as something like a predator or something that they should be scared of. Sometimes they're super kind of inquisitive of us and will come up and take a good look. And sometimes they're just a bit indifferent and ignore you. And so if I guess I'm saying, if they did just see us as a seal, then I feel like that inquisitive response wouldn't be there. I've never actually seen fish interact with seals underwater, so I don't know whether you get in the same way that sometimes you're down the bottom and a polyp will just come straight towards you, and the same with bass, and a lot of fish really will do that, but come straight towards you. It would surprise me if they did that. Seals, but maybe they do.
I feel like fish have learned a behavior around seals where if they see one, they tend to very quickly swim off. Because I've been on the kelp before and a seal's snagged up behind me and sort of right next to me, and all the fish just dissipate straight away. So they must know that it's a threat.
The difference between us and the seal.
Yeah, I think they often don't get enough credit, fish, for kind of being able to distinguish between different things, and although they may not know what we are, and although we've got I guess the interesting thing is, like, whenever we're underwater, it's quite possible, and if not likely, that we're the first human that fish has ever encountered in a lot of places. So they're like, what is that? And what's that shiny stuff around it? And is it food? Should I go and have a little look? Oh, no, I'm off. That's what usually happens to me anyway.
Well, from that, I take it that the second round of funding is to have you changed into a fish. So I think that's going to be the best way to get the data. And a second part of the question, again, we went through this in another podcast similar to the anatomy. Do fish have ears, and how can they hear?
Fish certainly do hear, and they do have ears. I think they work slightly different to our ears, but they certainly are incredibly attuned to vibration, and they're also incredibly communicative through sound, and they have many more ways of making sound. They have many more ways of vocalizing than we do. So we rely on communicate. We rely on the vibration of our vocal cords, but fish makes sound in a variety of ways. And interestingly, the fish are often named after the way that they make noise. So if you think about these Caribbean fish, you've got grunts. South Africa, there's grunters. They'll make noise. I'm not exactly sure of how that happens, but it's probably to do with vibrating muscles in their throats. You've got drums, which I think they make noise by drumming kind of against their swim bladder. I might be wrong in all this, but and you've got croakers. You've got all sorts of different ways of making sound. A lot of fish will grind the kind of back teeth in their jaw to kind of make this grinding noise. Some fish, I think, make this like high pitched chirp. So although we kind of see fish as when we get them on the deck of the boat and they're kind of silent being, but actually they're incredibly communicative through sound and in quite complex ways, I believe, in terms of the types of things they can communicate. So it's not simply that they'll make one noise, more like a bird perhaps that has an alarm call or a call it makes when it's feeding to signal to everyone else that there's food around, or that kind of thing. So yes, it's the answer. They definitely can hear. They do have ears in a sense, and they've got loads of ways of making sound. The funniest of which I think is they found that certain herring or something in the herring family makes noise, communicates by essentially high frequency gas bubbles out of the anus, which the scientists that discovered it gave the acronym fast repetitive ticks, aka farts.
That's how I communicate with my missus sometimes. And so bass we should now call bass, because actually they communicate by carrying around a bass guitar.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think Ben's got one final question before we move on to the listeners' questions.
Yeah, Pete, I was just wondering what your goals are for the future. Obviously, you've got a few projects on the go right now, and we haven't had a chance to get into all of them. And hopefully, you can come back another day where we can go into some more projects. But what are your goals for the future, looking ahead?
You know what? I have no idea. I've found myself in this quite ridiculous job where I put little electronic tags in fish and track where they go. I'm not really sure how I got here.
How does it get any better? Where do you get from there?
I'm quite enjoying it, and I hope that I just hope that something I do can end up being useful. Yeah. Is basically my one hope. I hope that it's not all just in vain. I'm sure it won't be, but when you're in the midst of these things and things aren't going well, and you've caught nothing that day, and like gear doesn't do what it's supposed to, you kind of think, is this all in vain? But I think my hope for the future is that we can make fisheries management evidence-based, through the stuff that we're doing. At least we can inform on it in some way. I hope that more people just engage with the sea as a kind of exciting place to be explored, rather than a place to be a bit wary of. And that sounds a bit pretentious, but
but we'd all agree with it, Pete. No, that's brilliant. Last section is listeners' questions. We've got a couple of questions. Anthony, do you want to do the first one?
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, just also for your future potential career, I'm sure the police will use your tagging skills for the local chat. So you'll be well in a job. But the first question, listener's question: how do feeding cycles / habits and fish diets change throughout the course of the year?
Well, good question, which I know very little about. Apart from, I guess, what comparing to a warm-blooded animal, fish generally, their body temperature is the same temperature as the water column. So the interesting thing with that is that if you imagine a fish in the summer water temperature, say it's 18 degrees, it has to eat a hell of a lot more to maintain its baseline metabolic rate compared to in the winter when the water is 8 to 10 degrees, simply because its metabolic rate is dictated completely by its surrounding water temperature, in effect. So, and it kind of it goes both ways, because the water temperature around it enables it to be way more active, because muscle movement, etc., is dependent on chemical reactions, and those happen faster at high temperatures. So it's able to move faster, but it needs to feed more. Whereas in the winter, they go to the real go slow mode. But in terms of varying diets throughout the season, it's probably completely species specific. So things that are remain in one place throughout the year will have to just adapt to whatever's there. Whereas we know that other fish that are really mobile, if you think about a bluefin tuna, it can be in Devon and Cornwall in August, and then it can be across the other side of the Atlantic in a couple of months, or it can be in the mid-Atlantic, or it could be in the Mediterranean. So its ability is a bit different. We can follow its food sources. So yeah, that's again another long-winded answer for saying very little.
No, that's great.
You've got to try, haven't you?
No, that's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, and I got one last question. How do you know Joe PK? Are we allowed to say, or?
Yeah, Joe. I know Joe PK, Joe Pike, because we live across the other side of the Kingsbridge Stockholm estuary from each other.
Nice.
I can nearly see his house from my house, or my parents' house, I should say. And he, the full backstory, if you want to know, is that my brother-in-law Jamie is a Kiwi, an incredible free diver and spear fisherman. And when he moved to the UK, befriended Joe through sort of local contacts, and then that's how I met Joe.
Right.
And I've been diving a few times with Joe, and he's always great company, and I've learned a lot from him. I think he probably knows far more about fish than I do. But yeah, we're good friends, and hopefully we can go for a dive together again soon.
Yeah,
I went on one trip with Joe down to Cornwall, North Cornwall, a year ago, and it was amazing fun. We got up at 4 a.m, drove down, launched from Asdo, from Rock actually, and then just spent the day just cruising around.
Oh, nice.
Saw minke whales, saw a minke whale, saw dolphins, saw some beautiful fish. Yeah, it was a great day. It was a good man.
Fantastic.
Nice. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to say thank you to Joe for giving us your name. You've been a wonderful guest, Pete. Really, really appreciate answering all of our questions. As I say, we didn't get through half of them. We've still got plenty more. So perhaps if you feel like coming on again at some point in the future, we'd love to have you on.
Oh, absolutely. There is definitely going to be a part 2, especially once we've got near to the end of all your data, because it would be good to look back and see how far you've come.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. You know, we're right in the midst of this project. We're still tagging fish, and as I say, like this research will be ongoing, and hopefully over the next couple of years, we'll have some really cool things to be able to share with everyone. So yeah, I'd be delighted to come back on with you guys. And thank you very much for having me.
Just one question before you go. Do you need volunteers?
Always.
Well, us 3 would love to come down and give you a hand for a day whenever you get a chance. So just let us know. Stay in touch.
Actually, yeah, that would be really cool, and then we can put on social media just so people. It's a bit of awareness, isn't it, about what you do and everything else?
Yeah. Likewise, if you're ever in the Plymouth area and want to go for a dive and teach me a thing or two, that'd be awesome as well.
Just before. Yeah, definitely. Just before you shoot off, if anybody wants to reach out or have a look at projects and stuff that you're doing, where can they find it?
The best place is probably Twitter, if anyone uses that anymore.
Oh, he's a lefty.
All the scientists I know post everything they do on Twitter. So
really?
Twitter handle. It's let me just find it. It's at Pete with a capital P _ Davies capital D 1. I'm also on Instagram, plain _ Pete. Or if anyone wants to just send me an email, it's peter.davies@plymouth.ac.uk.
Awesome. Well, thanks ever so much. Really nice to talk to you.
Guys.
We'll see you soon.
Cheers,
Pete.
Yeah,
nice
look forward to meeting you soon. Cheers, Pete.
1, 2, 3, 4.
I think we probably could have gone on for another 3 or 4 hours and probably longer with the amount of information that was in that. That was amazing, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was cool. I mean, to be fair, it's good. Cool. It's good that we've actually got an expert on the podcast for once, and not us just talking shit, thinking that we know everything.
I just forgot to ask him all of my personal doctor questions. I'll have to go to my GP next time. Never mind.
No, it's really good.
It's cool that we were kind of right about the fish noises there.
Yeah, the way that they feel the vibrations in the water.
Yeah, and I thought it was quite interesting, especially the way that fish make different noises with different parts of their anatomy as well. I've not really thought about it that much. Which you were saying the other day that you can almost hear the fish under the water. I always assumed it was lobsters and crabs, but clearly it's not just lobsters and crabs. There's a lot more to it than that. So yeah, really fascinating. So anyway, what's going on over the next week? Anybody got anything planned?
Got no more competitions now until mid-September.
Oh, a little way.
So I think you guys are going out later this week, aren't you, for a camp and cook? We
talked about it, didn't we? But I think we're just going to get out in the morning instead. With the weather.
I might still be, to be fair.
What?
Has Hayley kicked you out?
Well, no, but just because Ben's been flaky doesn't mean...
I brought a tent, mate. I brought a tent. Just for Thursday night.
Well, I'll WhatsApp you afterwards. But yeah, my plan is to still get out camping. Go out. Because obviously, as we said in the intro, you guys are still... now again ahead of me in the species hunt. So
I see. That's why you sacked me off.
so I plan on getting out. I plan on getting out over the next few days.
Nice.
I'm also going to a little bit of a secret spot on Saturday, which I'm not taking anybody with me. Sorry, guys.
The amount of times you say about these secret spots, I reckon you're full of shit.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Are you going with your new sugar daddy?
He's not old enough to be his sugar daddy.
Oh, what did we decide he was? Boyfriend.
I wondered how long it would take for this to come up in the podcast. Just because you get lent some spear guns by someone, and now all of a sudden he's your new sugar daddy.
Oh dear. I'm gonna have to jump on his brother anyway, because if you've got one brother, I need the other.
What about me? I'm gonna have to start putting out Lonely Hearts ads.
Yeah, well, no, it's not actually what you think. I'm going somewhere local, but yeah. Anyway, moving on. So, Anthony, there's actually a listener's question that we left out because it was exclusively for you, really. You are, of course.
I'm excited.
You are, of course, the person who knows.
No, I'm not
much
single.
more than all of us about rats.
Unfortunately, not.
Depends who's asking. So, Ras, someone wanted to know what is the best way to fillet a rat because they have so many bones and they're struggling. What do you think?
I think that is a misconception. Wrasse haven't got lots of bones. You need to take a bigger wrasse. So a grouper, what I call a grouper size wrasse.
What sort of size is that, like centimeters?
35, 40 centimeters and bigger. You'll see them in the water because they are huge in comparison to the other wrasse. And then once you've got them, scale them, and then fillet them as you would a bass or any other fish. They've got a big stomach cavity. So what I tend to do is I run my knife along the top sort of fin line and all the way down to the the spine, and then in halfway down, pull out to the tail, and then just use your knife really gently, but hug the rib cage. And effectively, there's not much meat around the ribs. So you could, in theory, cut through the ribs and then cut them off. But no, there isn't a lot of bones. There's no more bones in a wrasse than there is in a bass or any other fish. They've just got a bigger stomach cavity. But the flesh, once you get, say, for example, a 45 centimeter wrasse, there's as much meat, if not more, on a wrasse than there is on a bass. So yeah, really easy to fillet.
Cool. Or you could just try the Oyster Lady's recipe like I have tonight, and I just cut the thing into chunks and chucked it in there.
Have you tried it?
I haven't eaten it yet, so if you don't hear from me, then you know what's up. But
did you leave the scales on?
Yeah. I just cut it into chunks. I did alter the recipe slightly, probably for cooking skills more than anything else. But I did chop it up into chunks, and the entire fish is actually dissolved into the soup.
Oh, amazing!
There is nothing left of it.
Wow. How long is it boiling for?
Since this pod got 2 hours, that's it.
Okay, yeah.
Oh,
it's quite.
Let me know how it is.
It's quite soft flesh, though, isn't it? So
yeah, it is. Yeah.
So yeah, even the bones and everything's just tail, everything's gone.
Just to answer another misconception about wrasse, about how all of their flesh is green or red or whatever. Sometimes near the skin, you'll get a blue line, or sometimes even near the spine, you'll get a blue line, but that's just taken on color from where the skin is. There's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. I eat it as sashimi and everything else, and so it's not rancid or horrible. It doesn't taste funny. It's just got a little bit of color from the from the skin.
Nice, cool. And Ben, so you're feeling pretty smug with yourself, mate, because you're leading the species comp.
I know that it won't last forever, but it's a nice feeling. I'm not going to lie.
It is.
We went out for a nice dive yesterday afternoon in a spot that we thought was going to have 8 meter viz, had 80 centimeter viz.
Hard work, really hard work. But I was so excited when you came down, Anthony, wasn't I? I was like, mate, look what I've got. I've got this red mullet. I've been searching for this for months. And then this cheeky fucker comes along and shoots 2 of them.
Yeah, I got 2 red mullet. I wasn't looking for him. I was looking for flatfish. I missed 2 Dover sole.
How did you miss a Dover sole?
Well, because they were literally within 10 minutes of me getting in, and I was just being bullshit. And I was like, oh no, I don't need to shoot them. I'll just stab them with my spear. As I go towards considering the viz was horrendous, I go towards them with my spear, and they must have just seen me coming, or I'm moving really slow, and they just dodged and just swam away.
I've never had a Dover sole ever move on me, not even flinch.
Oh, both of them were immediately within 30 centimeters of my spear. They were gone.
Oh, really?
So, but they weren't covered whatsoever. So they must have only just recently got wherever they were.
I suggest you to embrace your feelings for while they last anyway, because I'm in Cornwall for 2 weeks. End of next week, I think it is. And I literally going to be spearfishing every day. So I'll plan on getting a fair amount of points ahead of both of you.
Well, I would say I wish you luck and break a leg, but nope.
When people hear us talking to each other, they must think I don't know what, but it's actually meant in a very loving way, isn't it?
You don't need enemies when you've got friends like these two. Well, no, it's been an amazing podcast. I think we could have gone on for probably 6 hours. And I don't know how the listeners would have felt on that. That's a hell of a road trip to listen to the podcast. But Pete, again, thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah,
we very much look forward to speaking to you again soon. And good luck with all the research. And just rewind it back and listen to his Twitter, Instagram, and email address if you need to get in touch with him.
Yeah, cool. I know we say it every week, but we just want to reach out and say thank you to everyone again for listening. Particularly the last couple of weeks, it's blown up. We've got quite a lot of listeners, and again, in even more countries. Like, we're nearly taking over the world, lads. So it's quite cool.
We're on episode 7 now. Episode 10, I said that we were going to be looking for sponsors. So you got three episodes to get in touch before I start knocking on your doors. But no, thanks again, guys, and it's great to talk to you. And we'll see you again next week.
Look forward to it.
Lads.
Catch you later. Bye.
Catch you later.
Cheers, boys.